Välkommen allesammans! Just back home for the weekend now, and then I'm off traveling again, so there's gonna be a couple more of my freestyle rant on the go videos coming up, but this one today is gonna be organized with some good sources for you, like I usually do. Trees and tree worship in the Norse and Germanic beliefs. We're going over the sources, and at the end, I'll give you some ideas about how trees in general should be treated for us modern day pagans, or just really anyone who wants to have more care for the environment. This would be how the ancient Germanic or Norse view towards taking care of trees would be. So, there's really a lot to go over here. I'm not going to get to it all. First, I'm going to go over really quickly the mythological mentions of sacred trees and possible tree spirits, but this is difficult because many of the myths in this aspect, it's debatable in regards to what certain trees or deities represent, so I'll have to do another video on all that, but this is just a first quick look of all the mythological sources. First, you have Igdrasil. You all know that one, the central tree of life in the Norse myths. It definitely seems like this is kind of a connecting barrier that divides the different realms or dimensions that we and the other entities live in. See my video about the 9 worlds. Yggdrasil also definitely seems like it represents the human body as a whole, and the creatures on it represent, you know, what would be equivalents to the chakras. I'm pretty convinced of that. I did a video on that you can watch too. Another theory is that Yggdrasil represents the placenta. Another theory is that it represents a very real sacred tree that existed in the world, or a sacred pillar that was worshipped by humans once. Iremans Oak, which I am going to speak about later on in this video. But there are definitely more trees in the mythology that were viewed as sacred. We have Mimmamæðir, Læróðir, Hódmimmisholt, which could all be different names for Igdrasil, and they have other functions too, but yeah, long list, that's too much to go into and not the focus for this video. But we can also speak about Ask and Embla, which is an ash and elm tree. Now these trees are the ones that Odin and his brothers used to breathe life into and morph into the first humans that exist. Now, of course, this myth is symbolic for something else, but it does potentially reflect that humans did evolve. They didn't evolve from trees, but instead they inherited their consciousness or their spirit originally from trees. Those are things that other cultures around the world have believed in, that our spirit and our consciousness, you know, was given to us by the tree's spirit and consciousness. But whatever, we can't be sure about that one. Then we have a couple semi-mythological trees, Glacier and Barnstokker, which were perhaps some very real trees that held some sacred meaning and had sacred powers. We can also speak about the runes, our alphabet, where each character symbolizes something very sacred and meaningful in our beliefs, and 2 of these actually represent trees, and that's Bjarkan and Yr, the birch and yew tree, 2 very central trees to pagan belief and ritual. We can also speak about deities and gods that are symbolic of a tree or tree spirit. Ullr, the god associated with bows and skis, is said to live in Yggdrasil, the valley of the yew trees. We're pretty sure he's some sort of tree spirit associated with the yew. Thor was said to live in oak trees, as was his equivalents in Roman and Greek mythology, Hercules and Jupiter. Vidar also seems to be a very powerful tree or forest spirit. It's all too long to go into here, and I just named a few there. Many of the gods and deities in the Norse myths represent some sort of tree spirit, and we know for sure that certain gods were said to live in trees or sacred groves. As usual, same as all other pagan and animist cultures in the world, but this will take an hour to break that down. It's not the focus of this video. I'll do another one about it. What we're speaking about in this video is the actual historical attestations of very real trees and pagans' behaviors and beliefs towards them, this is what we can really use to give us some definite answers. So here are some of the sources. A big one is Tacitus Germania. Lots of it in here. This is a Roman historian from the 1st century speaking about the Germanic tribes when we were all one people at this time. And he writes that the Germanic peoples did not have temples like the Romans or Greeks. Instead, they consecrate woods and groves, and they apply to the name of the gods to that mysterious presence which they see only with the eye of devotion. We can see an example of this type of thing in the grove of the semonis, which refers to something what Tacitus called castum nemus, so a chest grove in which the image of the goddess Nerthus was hollowed, and he called the goddess Nerthus the ruler or god of all things. And it's believed to be the Norse god Njord, but it definitely Njord appears to be more important in the Proto-Germanic era than in the Viking era. But anyway, this grove was dedicated to Nerthus, whoever that was, and it allowed no one to enter the grove without being chained and blindfolded. And if the blindfold fell down, they had to crawl out of the grove looking down so they couldn't see. So it definitely seems like the energy in this sacred grove where the god Nerthus lived was meant to be perceived and not seen. Perfect example of meditation. And these were the semonis tribe, so this would be a tribe in northern Germany, what is now northern Germany. Tacitus also mentions another grove dedicated to Nerthus, which was on a remote island at sea, and they think that is on Zeeland in Denmark. I think more likely it's Lashe. See my video about that, because it's said in a few sources that Lashe is a place where the gods could be found and where we could travel to different realms at this sacred island. Tacitus also mentions, and many sources also mention too, how they held sacrifices in groves often. And groves, by the way, for those of you who don't know, it's a small forest of trees that has little or no undergrowth and believed to be sacred areas all around the world. Why? I'll tell you that in just a minute. He also writes in this source that there was a woods sacred to Hercules, aka Thor, and that was at the river Weser in Germany, where the semones reportedly held their rituals. He also writes how the Cherusi tribe sacrificed the Roman soldiers, hanging them from the trees after the battle of the Teutoburger forest. So that would be some grove in Kalkreise, Germany, somewhere around that area. A different source speaks about the grove of Bauna, and that was in ancient Frisia somewhere, so modern Netherlands. We don't know exactly who Bauna is, but it is a goddess. It could be Freya or Frigg, maybe. And the tribes there, the ancient Frisian tribes, dismembered the invading Romans and hung them up in the trees. These are all sources from the Germanic tribal era. Let's fast forward to some other sources a little bit later on in time, before the Viking Age. A sacred tree near the area of Hesse, Germany was called Thors Oak or Thors Oak. And here the missionary Saint Boniface and his army cut down the oak tree there, and he used it to build a church and forcefully Christianized or killed the Saxons there. Horrible bastard. Bad stories about that one. Slightly later on in time, in the late 700s, another horrible bastard, Charlemagne, did the same thing at Iremans Oak. That was supposed to be near Obermarsberg in Germany. Now, Iremans Oak, we don't know if it was a tree or some kind of rock formation or pillar or whatever, but whatever it was some absolutely massive pillar that reached far up into the sky that they believed held up the sky itself. And it was so big that Charlemagne and his army, the thousands of soldiers, his army, could not even completely destroy Iremans Oak in the many days that they had in the area. One theory is that this is actually what Igdrasil was, and it could possibly be the rock formations at Igdrasil, or what is left of it that is there today. We don't know. We only know that it was very big and very sacred to the worship of the Germanic peoples, and that was a horrible bastard that destroyed it. So that was before the Viking Age slightly. fast forward a couple hundred years, and we can look at sources from the Viking Age. This happened many places in Scandinavia. When the Christians came in, they cut down sacred trees and built their churches there. But the clearest written record of this we have is actually from Ireland. The Irish word for it was called Cael Tomaid, or Thor's Grove, and it was just outside of Dublin, where the Norse had settled / invaded, and the Irish destroyed it after the Battle of Glenmama. That was one, but really there's another much more clear example of sacred trees or groves we have in Scandinavia, and that was at the Temple of Uppsala in the late Viking Age. There was a sacred grove there and temple where sacrifices took place. Sacrifices took place in the grove, but there was also a great big evergreen tree right near the temple that was believed to be sacred. In another source, Hedvarda Saga, it actually says that that same tree was given horse sacrifice, and then they smeared the trees with blood, just as is done with the stone altars in other sources. So same kind of thing, that they could give their offerings and sacrifices to the trees. But yeah, this is a late example we have of pagan worship and ritual involving trees, and this is the late Viking Age. After Christianity came in fully, all these things became very illegal. Just the belief, this was a written law, just the simple belief that there were spirits in groves and trees that would be punishable by outlawry, so one of the worst crimes. And so does that mean that paganism died out? You guys know the answer to that by now if you watch the channel. Absolutely not. We have dozens of mentions of the belief in tree spirits and certain rituals involving trees and the folk tradition. You know, folk tales, practices, traditions recorded all the way from the 1500s up until the 1800s in remote villages in Scandinavia. And really, we even still do some of these rituals today that we don't realize. So the animist belief in tree spirits never really died out completely. For the folk tradition, you know, I would need a much longer video to go over all that, but what I went over in this video, what I wanted to give you is the sources that give clear examples of trees involved in the mythology, ritual, or worship from pagan times, but I'll do lots more video on this. But what I will give you in this video before I finish is how we can behave towards trees and how they might have behaved in general in pagan times towards trees. So I'll give you 4 tips. First, you can give offerings. We have records of this from pagan times and also in more recent folk tradition, as well as from all over the world, cultures leaving certain offerings. You know, we don't have to hang up hundreds of Roman soldiers from the trees as they did in some of the sources. That is a ritual, but it has a whole different purpose, spiritual purpose. I'll do another video on that, but just for the purpose of this, today we can leave bread, fruit, meat, especially in the folk tradition, where when bloods were made illegal in Christian times, they left offerings of meat in these trees. They couldn't do it the traditional pagan way, so they transitioned to leaving meat in trees, and we have records of that as late as the 1800s in rural Scandinavia. Leave whatever you want, just be aware that these offerings are for the animals that live in the trees, squirrels and birds and things like that, so leave things that they would enjoy. I do this all the time, honestly, at least once a week, even if it's just some food scraps. You know, it's better left up in the trees than throwing it in the trash. But of course, don't litter plastic or anything else if you're giving offerings to the trees. Tip number 2. Not to get too hippie with all of you now, but you can make a connection with the tree and even some contact. There has actually been studies out there that show hugging a tree can increase levels of good hormones and chemicals in our bodies, like oxytocin, making us feel good and happy and healthy. Now, don't go getting too freaky with a tree out in public. The tree probably doesn't like that either, and someone's going to call the police on you just because there's some crazy person humping the tree in the park. But, you know, just some touch and physical contact is good. The ancient Japanese did something like this called shirin-yoku, I think, and that's forest bathing translated. So just walking around through the forest, getting some contact with the trees, and you should feel some difference. Yeah, does anyone remember what it felt like to climb trees when we were kids? Like you're feeling shitty all day, you don't want to be in school, just like lethargic and crappy, depressed, and then you go out to play in the forest or the park and some trees and you just feel great. And the trees like that too, interaction, right? Just don't be a fat ass and go walk out on the skinniest branch. Tip number 3 of how to deal with the use of these trees specifically, chopping it down and using it to build furniture or buildings or whatever, or ships. If trees have a spirit, right, and even gods may reside in trees sometimes, isn't it wrong to chop them down and use them? Well, the answer is yes, just like it's wrong to kill an animal for food, just like it's wrong to kill a human, just like a lot of things are ethically and morally wrong, but sometimes those things are necessary. The key is to only do it when it's necessary. Now, different cultures in different parts of the world have had different attitudes as to when and why it is necessary to cut down a tree, but the Norse texts don't provide an existing answer, not the text that we still have in existence today. But then the truth is, by the Viking Age, they seem to have lost the understanding of this belief anyway. Of course, it's okay to cut down a tree to build a house or a ship or a fire to keep you warm in the winter. But in some Viking battles, they would go out and cut trees down just for the hell of it. Saint Olav cut down hundreds of trees just to send them out into a river to block King Knut from coming through. They also cut down trees to use as logs to roll the ships over. Remember when they sacked Paris? But it wasn't always like this. The Germanic tribal era, it was for sure much more respect towards trees, and they would be more aware that they shouldn't cut them down. But remember, as I always say, the Viking Age is not a reflection of our actual beliefs. They were starting to lose their beliefs by that time. It was going down. So we have no sources about that, how to deal with trees in the Norse beliefs, but I'll give you a tip from another culture. The Nayaka tribe from India is the only one that I have read that has the most detailed laws and customs as to how to deal with the use of trees. First thing, if possible, take trees that have already fallen. So you see if you can use that. Always take the fallen trees first if you can use it. Second, if you have to cut into a tree, cut off the dry branches and only the ones that are dying, and leave the healthy parts of the tree alone. That's what the Nayaka tribe would do. Third, if you have to cut down a whole tree, do it only if it is necessary, and do it for self and immediate use only. You can also make an informed decision about which tree you cut down. The Nayaka tribe, if they did have to cut down a tree, they would closely examine a bunch of trees in that area and see which one is the driest and most usable for the purpose they are doing. Don't cut down any fresh, young, vibrant trees. Things like that. Don't be just some big dumbass plowing into the forest, chopping down the first tree you see. That is a very important tip. Final tip, don't ever cut down trees or do anything disrespectful in groves, okay? As you have seen from the sources, groves have always been very sacred, and they're very different than an average forest that is densely packed with shrubs or undergrowth, right? Groves have been believed to be where the most meaningful spirits or even gods have lived in the Norse tradition and other places in the world. And this is for good reason, as opposed to dense forest packs with trees and shrubs and all sorts of life on the forest floors. Groves have pretty much just an empty space in the forest and just trees growing straight up. So the idea there is that spirits or gods want more space around the trees that they reside in and a more hollowed area around. And that also makes space for humans and animals to come through to connect with these trees and these spirits. Just remember to be respectful when you're coming into groves here. Go piss or shit or party somewhere else, So I don't know if all that's true or not. And those are just what the sources say and what other cultures have believed in. You don't have to believe all that if you don't want. I'm just saying our world would be a better place if we treated trees with this much respect and only cut them down if it is necessary. Perfect example, like if you go to IKEA and you need a table, you know, you'll only spend a few dollars. That's easy. Anyone can do that. That's not difficult, so people are more likely to do that. But if you actually needed to get out into the woods, do some hard labor, cut down and carry the tree or the log and shape it and carve it into whatever you needed, those types of things would help people use less wood and stop contributing to deforestation, right? If people had to do all the work themselves, they might say, yeah, fuck it, I really don't need 2 bedside nightstands, do I? And I really don't need 5 useless chairs around the house that nobody uses, right? So just that behavior and thought would save more trees and be better for nature. Instead, you know, we have turned chopping trees down into a billion-dollar industry, and it's leading to many bad things for nature, animals, and humans too. I think we can all agree on that at least, but you can believe whatever you want as far as the spirituality goes. But that's all I have to say for today. I hope you enjoyed. Vi ses nästa gång.